All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
There is no shortage of monsters to haunt our dreams.
You got red on you.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Alive! It's alive!
Groovy.
And welcome to Oh, the Horror, a horror movie podcast with an expert's opinion and a newbie's kind of opinion about modern and classic horror films. I'm your host, Rob Holmes.
And I'm your other host, Steve Allman.
And today's film is Child's Play.
Yes, the infamous 1988 film directed by Tom Holland and written by Don Mancini, John Lafia. Am I saying that right?
John Lafia.
Lafia and Tom Holland as well.
Yep.
This is a classic horror film. People often get this confused with just saying Chucky because it's synonymous with Chucky.
It's the Chucky franchise.
Right, and I think this is was there a Child's Play too? Because in the Child's Play canon, we often forget that it started with this movie.
So Child's Play was originally a trilogy. So the first one came out in 88, the second one came out in 1990, and the third one came out in 1991. 2 and 3 were filmed back to back, and that was kind of meant to just be where they were going to end it. Then we ended up with terrible things, such as Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky,
Yes.
and then Curse of Chucky, which was somewhat redeeming compared to the original ones. All have been written in some part by Don Mancini.
Interesting. And he's been, throughout this franchise, you could say, he's always seemingly had a hand in it, thus kind of staying true, I guess you could say, to the spirit of the franchise, as you could say. Because this is, I guess, like the B tier of the classic horror characters that I would say. Like you got Michael Myers, you got Jason, you got Freddy. And then, like, somewhere off in the sort of B canon is Chucky and the other ones.
Chucky, Pinhead.
Exactly. It takes on a bit more of a B horror aside, or at least not taken as seriously in the sort of canon of franchise slasher movies.
Not now.
No.
At the time when the first one came out, Child's Play was kind of meant to be a thriller. There was some stuff in it where it was originally meant to be more of a psychological horror film. And then from there, it just became more about, okay, Chucky's a horror icon. Let's really amp this up. And in the second and third one go kind of off the rails. By the time you hit the fourth, it's completely off the rails. And the fifth one, which I hate Seed of Chucky. I'll straight up just say it. I hate it. Directed by Don Mancini.
Interesting.
Like, that was the first one he directed out of all of them. And then he directed Curse of Chucky, which Curse of Chucky is not terrible. He wanted to get back to the roots of making it a horror film and stop parodying his own films.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But it all started with Child's Play. So let's talk a little bit about what the plot, overall synopsis, I guess you could say, of Child's Play is.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
So it starts with serial killer, the Lakeshore Strangler. This takes place in Chicago, which is amazing. And
hilariously.
They really highlight Chicago in this film. It starts off with Charles Lee Ray. He's the Lakeshore Strangler.
Or Bobcat Goldthwait, that I'd like to say.
And
I'm gonna get you guys.
Yeah, I mean, Brad Dourif has that, like, really distinct, that voice is just so iconic at this point.
It is, and
Yeah.
I was surprised that, like, when we get the actual turn of, like, how Chucky actually began, like, I completely forgot how insane this
It's
is, like,
completely insane. Completely insane.
because, okay, so let's get to exactly
So,
what starts off
Charles
Chucky.
Lee Ray is on the run from Detective Mike Norris, who's played by Chris Sarandon, and he corners him inside of a toy shop located on Wabash and Van Buren, because they mention that repeatedly.
Yeah, like they need to get that tax credit right off.
They're just like, look, we're going to really showcase Chicago.
Because we really need to. You know what? No, Chicago was popping off in the 80s. Like,
Absolutely.
the Bears had won.
Yeah.
Like, all of John Hughes' movies were there. Like, Chicago was the it for,
It was
like,
a, it
that
was
was
a great
hotbed.
place to film. Absolutely.
It's like Atlanta now in 2016.
Oh, yeah. And so Charles Lee Ray gets cornered. He gets shot. And as he's about to die, he transfers his soul into a good guy doll, which was a rip on the My Buddies at the time and Cabbage Patch dolls. So he gets himself inside of this doll, and then we cut to 7-year-old Andy Barkley. It's his played by Alex Vincent.
I'm going to have to stop you right there, Rob. When we are actually seeing this soul transfer being performed on this
Right.
doll with this hardened gangster, is there any other prior knowledge in the canon that he may know some sort of satanic ritual to transfer his soul to, say, an inanimate object before? Because I don't think that's very heavy in the criminal underbelly of knowing satanic rituals.
They bring it up in the movie a little bit. I mean, he figured he was going to try and transfer his soul into something.
Right.
And in the beginning, he's like, I need to find someone, find something. And then he sees this doll and figures, I'm dying anyway. Why don't I try it and see if this works?
I would just love a throwaway line. It's just like, I know, like, you busted me and the satanic ritual gang. Now you're gonna rue the day.
I don't think anybody knew he was part of a satanic ritual gang.
Neither. I barely did, and I was like, oh, okay, you got some necromancy out of your pocket
once
here.
the voodoo stuff starts, then you're like, all right, this definitely takes you off into a whole new
Right.
new level. Anyway, he transfers his soul, and now he's in this doll. Andy Barkley, we're introduced to him, and his mother, Karen Barkley, played by Catherine Hicks. She's a single mom. Andy's dad has died.
Good old Sandy.
Andy's really just kind of alone. She's working all the time. And Andy loves the Good Guy TV show. He watches it constantly. Apparently, it's on all day. He watches it in the morning. He watches it later in the afternoon. He's constantly watching
It's
it.
around the clock. And
Yeah.
that's probably like, I bet you like those cable TV networks were coming out with all of those cartoon shows that
Yep.
were just shilling all of those for toys and everything. So it's probably a bit of a commentary on consumerism as well.
Absolutely. So he wants a Good Guy doll. He doesn't get one, but the mom is at her job. She's working at a department store downtown, and her friend Maggie ends up being like, hey, there's a peddler out back. He'll sell you one of these dolls. I know they're $100 normally, which $100 in 1988 is ridiculous.
Crazy expensive. And
Yeah.
by the way, don't you just miss the days where you could just find a peddler that'll give you a Furby off the street?
Yeah.
Like, remember those good old days?
yeah.
Like, we just needed the hot new toy, but apparently toys aren't hot now. It's just screens.
Well, the toy was easy to get because he got it from a burnt down
Yeah.
toy store. So he got it from
that may or may not have had a murder take place in it.
So the toy store is destroyed right in the beginning. So that's how that guy gets the doll. So she buys the doll for $30, and Andy gets it. He's thrilled. She has to work that night. So Maggie is going to watch Andy. Well, things don't go so well because Chucky is alive. And in the beginning, you don't really know that he's alive. You think it may not have actually worked, and this kid could just be insane.
Right.
And believing this. But then pretty soon after that, you're like, oh, okay, this doll is going around killing people. You never hear him talk for the first 45 minutes of the film at all. So you're just kind of like, it still keeps you a little in suspense about it. But pushes her out of a window, which is at Diversey and Pine Grove.
Yeah, and it's weird seeing the things that, like, I could easily recognize a lot of the streets, say, when I watched, like, a Ferris Bueller's Day Off, because it's shot in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
You can clearly see all those city streets and those corners that you recognize. But I actually had to look up a couple of the locations because I'm like, because there's a turret on that building, and I recognize that turret, kind of, but... Okay, so then I look it up, and I'm like, oh, that corner that I was at college at almost all the time, like that building was there. It's an interesting time capsule of the time.
Dude, I lived down the street from it for a while. Had no idea until I watched the movie again.
Complete makeover.
When you watch it, you don't really pay attention to that stuff, except this viewing, it stuck out like a sore thumb. So at this point, Maggie has fallen out of the building to her death. They think that Andy may have had something to do with it because Andy's blaming Chucky. So they take him off to be institutionalized. And then Catherine Hicks flips out and picks up the box when she gets home. Batteries fall out of it.
Yes.
And
the clear Hitchcockian reveal of the batteries being out of the doll.
And they drop down, this look on her face of, oh shit. So she goes over and is yelling at the doll and just like, come on, say something. She's like, well, I'll make you talk. And gets the fire lit.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, at the midway point, Chucky comes alive. The doll who we know as being a murderous, foul-mouthed comic relief a lot of the time later on in the series never really says anything at all for the first 45 minutes. You never hear him talk until finally when he comes alive. Even when he's killing people, in the beginning, because he takes Andy to the South Side to like blow up Eddie Caputo, who Eddie Caputo was Charles Lee Ray's partner,
Right.
but ended up leaving him to die, essentially. And yeah, he ends up starting to take people out. But no one seems to notice that this kid who should be in school is taking the L down to the South Side at like 35th Street or something.
There are interesting contrivances that are in this movie that I'm kind of willing to let go because of this beginning 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the beginning, before Chucky actually says anything, or there's a reveal that like we know that the kid's not crazy, it reminds me a bit of like a Spielbergian, almost poltergeisty
Right.
sort of camp and like not fun but whimsy, where they're like, well, Chucky said that he had to do that, and like we all know that that the doll is talking to them, and like
Yeah.
you see the creepy head move and the eyes blink and all that stuff, and it's very well done, and then we see this turn when Chucky actually comes alive, and he's just this brash, vulgar, borderline. He's like the baby from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
He's
just
still
like
that,
this.
He's still that serial killer.
Exactly.
He is still Charles Lee Ray. And when he finally does that reveal, yeah, it's a total turn, because you're expecting it to just be this doll who's maybe whispering some stuff, maybe not in that voice at all.
Exactly.
Once
And-
you hear it, oh man.
And you expected, like, you're like, where was that subtlety that you had
Right.
before somebody needed you to talk beforehand? Because I feel that, like, if this gangster was so hell bent on revenge and his spirit was trapped inside this doll, he would just say fuck it and just be running around like a crazy person. But he's a bit more cunning than that.
They try to keep it that way, mainly I think due to the voodoo reveal later on.
Right.
Which I gotta say, one of the reasons I love this film is they touch on the voodoo aspects, which they never do in any of the other films. He does the ceremony or the ritual trying to get into Andy in 2 and then part of 3.
Right.
And then tries it at the end of 6. And he tries it in other films as well, but they never really focus on the fact that it all came from a voodoo priest who had taught him how to take his soul and put it into another body and transfer it.
And that's exactly kind of why I liked this movie so much, is because that had the balls to kind of lean into its own premise that heavily come the end. Because normally this would have ended in a bit of a Twilight Zone-y sort of, it's like, well, that's just another mystery that we don't know how this guy's soul got into the body of a doll. But
Right, which
I guess we'll save the day later.
Then they did the voodoo doll scene.
Right.
Which I think the voodoo doll scene is what made me understand why he could have gotten into the doll's body.
Okay.
Because if the voodoo doll really exists where you're able to break a limb on the doll and it's really breaking someone's limb, which he does to Dr. Death,
right,
it makes it seem way possible that he could transfer his soul through Dumbella into a doll or an inanimate object, which the guy even says, the longer you spend in this doll, you're going to become human. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, the only way that you can transfer your soul again is to the first person you told your secret. And
I'm like, oh, that's a fun little thing. They were just like, all right, great.
Which makes it for the sequel that it's like, oh, okay, well, he can come back and get Andy. And then each subsequent time he comes back, it's the first person he tells. So he can later on go to whoever he wants to try and get into them.
Right. So let's break down a couple more important scenes. So we were at the halfway point.
Yeah.
Chucky has revealed himself, and then we get a couple more ways of Chucky terrorizing our main character now.
Yes. So at this point, Chucky has decided he's gonna find Andy because the mother already knows. So she goes to Detective Norris and is like, "No, Andy's telling the truth. My doll's alive and he's coming after everyone who screwed him over." And in the beginning, Charles Lee Ray is like, "I'm going to get you, Eddie, and I'm going to get you too," to the detective. He's like, "I'm going to find you." Is
really hamming it up and chewing the scenery, which I kind of like.
As only Brad Dourif can do.
Through a doll.
Through a doll. And, well, this is beforehand. He even says he's going to get him. And the way that he says it, as he's bleeding out, his voice goes to that high pitch. It's like, I'm dying. And you're like, oh, yeah, you could totally voice Chucky. Because then when Chucky wants to be nice and not sinister, he has this kind of
He's got that range.
He's got that range for it. So he decides he's going to try and kill Detective Norris. Gets into a car with him. First tries to smother him with a plastic bag and asphyxiate him. And then the knife comes through the seat multiple times, through the back of the seat, which Detective Norris is able to dodge, and then under it, which he ends up somehow being able to dodge, and then is like lifting his feet up. His car is just veering left, right, everywhere, crashing into anything it can possibly crash into, it crashes into until it flips over. Chucky tries to kill him, but he ends up burning Chucky's face, and it's the first time that Chucky feels pain. He shoots him again, or he shoots him the first time. Chucky's knocked back, but Chucky's bleeding. And that's when Chucky goes to see Dr. Death, the voodoo guy. Proceeds to break the guy's leg
which is
arm.
actually very interesting. Rarely do we actually get like, okay, when we get into the second act break, we have now the villain's perspective. It's like, all right, now time to go get fixed up for the finale.
Right.
Like now is my moment to be like, all right, what's wrong with me?
Well, now he has a purpose.
Yeah, exactly. But like we usually if this were a typical movie, we would have stuck either with the mom or the detective character to find out. It's like, all right, where is he gone now? What's he doing? And then that would have been a revelation to actually find out through them because they don't know what's happening. But instead, we're following Chucky through his own problems, we've
now been introduced to Chucky. He talks. We see him doing that. We've seen him moving around and attacking people. Now we get to find out a little more of his backstory when he meets with the voodoo priest and then ends up killing him. Because Dr. Death is like, no, you are an abomination. Everything I taught you, you've bastardized all of it. Like, you're a terrible, terrible human. I'm not gonna help you with any of this. And then that's when the voodoo doll comes out.
You gotta really admit why Dr. Death would try to teach all these things to a criminal at the time.
I think maybe it wasn't. He didn't know he was a serial killer, because a criminal and then serial killer are two
different things.
Different things. So you can be a bad guy learning all this stuff and studying the dark arts, but the second you're a serial killer murdering people and put yourself inside of a doll because you want to cheat death, that could be one of those things where he's just like, no.
Good insurance policy to have when you're a serial killer, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then throughout the rest of the film, he's going after Andy. He realizes, all right, well, the only way that I can live is by getting my soul into this 7-year-old boy. Which he seems really thrilled about. He's like, I'm gonna be a kid again.
In a very perverse way. I'm like, all right, man, you're messed up.
But he wants a new reign of terror.
Exactly.
He's pure evil, so why would he not
hit the reset button on life and just start at 7
and be able to be like, all right, well, I can do this all over again.
I could Damien Omen this.
And yeah, he escapes and he goes back home from the institution. The doctor who's there gets his head fried with a electroshock machine.
That's one of my favorites, by the way. That's my favorite kill.
It's just so absurd.
Yeah.
Just stabs him with the scalpel in the back of the knee, and then just zaps him until he dies. And then we come down to the final confrontation where Chucky has cornered Andy and he's ready to transfer the soul. You see the storm starting because every time Chucky transfers his soul, the clouds start storming up. Everything gets really strange. It looks super apocalyptic, and they go in there and they try to stop Chucky. Multiple different ways.
I'm surprised at the amount of like almost Kevin McAllister-esque type of planning that they've gone into for all of these contingencies to get rid of Chucky.
They kill him 3 or 4 times, probably. To
rather
make sure
effectively, you'd think.
You would think.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about this one a lot too, is that Chucky gets dismembered really early on. He gets set into a fireplace with one of the best lines ever. But Andy, we're friends to the end. And Andy, this is the end, friend.
God.
And then lights him up. Chucky's burning, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess Chucky's finally dead. Nope. Chucky has gotten himself out. He's had his arm blown off at that point, I think. He's then he gets shot, and he gets his head knocked off. And
was this before or after the Terminator?
This was after.
Okay, I just wanted to throw that out there, and we can continue. All right.
He's kind of like a Terminator. He can't be stopped. So he's torched, and you can see the metal little endoskeleton actually coming out from like on his hand and everything. His face is half melted. He gets shot a bunch of times. We find out though that his heart is the one thing that can stop him. You shoot through his heart. Once he's human, it's okay. So I guess Andy's mom is really bad at shooting point blank in the chest.
Listen, she's never held a firearm in her life. She
shoots him directly in the chest twice. Somehow it doesn't hit him in the heart. Chucky's lost his head at one point, and you think, okay, they finally have gotten him. He's dead. He's been charred. He's tried to attack him. They knocked his head off. He has to be dead at this point. They've knocked limbs off, an arm and a leg. Nope. Chucky somehow has found his way through the vents, attacks the detective's partner, and is trying to choke him out. The head is screaming, kill him, and it just gets even crazier, and then they finally are able to throw the body to the side, shoot him in the heart, and then Chucky finally dies. And you're expecting some sort of resolution at the end after that, but the kid, Andy, just walks out the door, they close the door a bit, freeze frame.
Yeah.
That's it.
Riding on the wind, and then just
it just ends.
Leave it like that. They had to have just run out of film, I'm assuming. Like, as far as endings are concerned, I was actually kind of annoyed.
We're friends to the end.
This is the end, friend.
So the late 80s, they kind of had a killer doll craze for a lot of movies.
Killer doll as in actual killer doll?
As in
like Chucky-esque.
As in Child's Play was not the only one.
Okay.
So Stuart Gordon in 1987 made a film called Dolls. And then there was, about the same year as Child's Play, you had Puppet Master come out. Then after that, you had Doll Man, you had Demonic Toys. Full Moon Entertainment really tried to capitalize on a lot of the killer doll stuff that was going on during that time. Dolly Dearest in 1991.
Jesus.
So it comes in phases.
Okay.
We get zombies, we get
New
vampires,
trends, yeah.
we get werewolves. This was the killer doll phase. I mean, in Trilogy of Terror, they did the same thing.
I know, but the fucking 80s, man. Killer dolls.
Killer
Who'd have
dolls.
thought?
Killer dolls are fucking creepy. And
They are.
We're talking about Cabbage Patch coming out at the time.
Right.
We're talking about My Buddy, which this film killed the My Buddies.
I'll bet it did.
Completely killed them.
That's awesome.
They were never able to recover after this film came out because parents were freaking out about this. They were protesting it like crazy. And I think the distribution rights ended up going from, I want to say they went from MGM over to Universal. They just wanted to get rid of this film and push it under the rug. But actually, Child's Play, the first one, domestically is the highest grossing of the entire franchise.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And it had a relatively small budget. We're talking about $9 million. And it opened at number 1 the week it came out.
Mm-hmm. And overall gross of like $32 million, was it?
$32,842,703.
Wow. Okay. So moreover made its money back, for sure.
Absolutely. And so it opened at number 1. And it beat Ernest Saves Christmas and Iron Eagle 2 when it came out.
Stiff competition. Very stiff competition. It could have been anybody's race.
And then a week earlier, John Carpenter's They Live opened at number 1.
Well,
so there was definitely,
there you go.
Well, there's definitely a horror. Horror films usually do well on week 1, and especially in the 80s.
That would have been a dope 2 weekends at the movies.
That would have been amazing.
God, to be living in the 80s. What all came out that year? Just like every other weekend, it seemed like, in some certain year of the 80s.
I mean,
you had some form of classic.
You had franchises that you knew were always going to be coming out. You had Nightmare on Elm Street. You had Friday the 13th. You even had Texas Chainsaw doing Texas Chainsaw 2, and I think
exactly
1986 or something like that. So horror was huge. And, doing something like Child's Play, it was different. It was strange. It was critically well received for the most part.
Now, what actually makes this one so important? Because as critical acclaim for this movie could have been fine, but what to you makes this an actually enduring piece of film, of horror film?
I would say for the most part it takes itself seriously. It tries to. I mean, the film for what it is, the fact that it's a person who used voodoo to get their body into the soul, or their soul into the body of a doll, and then trying to kill people, they really play on your heartstrings a bit with Alex Vincent's character, because you feel terrible for this kid. This kid has lost his father. His mother's never around. He's feeling lonely all the time. He finally gets the one thing that he wanted more than anything, and it ends up wrecking his entire life.
Right. And not that there could have been even a moral around that, because, hey, we just freeze frame.
Yeah.
Because all right, that's how we do it. But I kind of actually because my exposure to Chucky was, I think, the very first actual recollection. Chucky was not even on my radar until 2 things happened. One, I saw The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 4, where the Krusty the Clown doll turns evil, and that's their kind of Chucky spoof. I didn't even know what they were spoofing until I think this might have been in the early 2000s, maybe, when I think what was the Chucky movie with Jennifer Tilly in it?
There was two.
Okay, the first one then.
So Bride of Chucky, 1998. Seed of Chucky, 2004.
That'll be Seed of Chucky then. I was first exposed to that, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, oh wait, that's that doll that everybody does not like.
Yeah.
And then my impression of Chucky was this vulgar, brash, like crass for crass sake, killer doll, I guess. And I didn't really understand the appeal to it. And then now that I actually watched this origin story, if you will, I had a very tough time taking it seriously. But as I try to like kind of run back all of the things that I would actually think about Chucky for, I'm like, okay, this starts off with like a little bit of like a whimsical, sort of mystical kind of a fun movie, and then it turns into this like dark and very adult and scary story.
Right.
To me, it kept a bit of B-horror schlock that I actually liked. Like in the 80s that I borderline expect, but it had a lot of cool mystical elements along with it that I actually was very surprised by.
And they never really touch on a lot of that stuff in any of the sequels. In the sequels, it's I've told someone, now I need to transfer my soul into them.
Right, and that's kind of the whole thing in almost every sequel, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and Chucky always is able to come back. I mean, in the sequel, Andy Barclay's mom is now institutionalized, and he's going through foster care because no one believes any of this happened. And I'm like, you have multiple witnesses, that's fine. Even at the end of the first one, they're like, yeah, I believe you, but who's going to believe me? And it's like, yeah, I know exactly. Who is going to
believe you?
So this kid goes in and out of foster homes, and Play Pal Toys, I think it's Play Pal Toys.
That's a great before the brand.
or the good guys, the good guy dolls, they decide that they're going to put the doll back together to show that it's not evil. We're going to reconstruct this demon doll from all the pieces that we found.
Because it damaged our brand.
And we need to recover from it. Well, they do, and because it has pieces of the original doll and everything in there, a big electrical short circuit, bunch of people die, Chucky's back. Then Chucky gets destroyed at the end of the second one at the Play Pal Toys factory.
Of course.
At the Good Guy doll factory at the assembly line. So that's cool because you get to see more of the corporate greed going on there at the time.
Right, yeah.
And it was really cool. And then the third one, they just decide it's 8 years later. The place has been closed down, but they're going to start making Good Guy dolls again from whatever plastic stuff that had been in this vat that Chucky ends up melting into the second one. Boom, he comes back in the third one.
Right.
Repeat.
Okay. So it just gets more and more and more contrived as it goes on.
It gets absurd. 2 and 3 were filmed back to back. It was more about the catchphrases. It was more about little quips that he's going to do.
The one-liners and
one-liners.
Okay.
All the time. He always had a one-liner when he was killing people.
Okay. And that's, comes with the territory, usually, part of the fun. Mm-hmm. But I think this one can kind of actually stand the test of time. You have more interesting facts that I actually kind of find fascinating when I actually read over your notes. And it was like, when you found that it was, it was originally called Blood Brother.
So it was originally titled Blood Brother. The idea was that Good Guy dolls had latex skin with fake blood underneath. So if a good guy was ever injured, the parents could buy official Good Guy bandages.
Which is horrifying.
Which is more marketing, though, into consumerism and what they were trying to sell.
Right, because you got the dolls that like drink from the bottle and all that stuff.
And it was
but the fake blood with that's horrifying.
Yeah. But it was like a My Buddy or any of those type of dolls or Cabbage Patch. So Andy makes a blood pact with Chucky, who in this one is known as Buddy, which at one point they were going to call the film something that dealt with like Buddy as well. He's known as Buddy in that draft, and he does this blood pact that causes him to come alive. But Buddy existed because he was a manifestation of Andy's anger towards losing his father and the loneliness and isolation of not having his mom around.
That's nuts and kind of awesome.
Right, and he would only come alive when Andy was asleep.
That's crazy cool.
Yeah, and anybody who ever angered Andy or bothered Andy, he would take his revenge on.
Now that in and of itself is an awesome idea for a movie, but how, like, in the process of making it, it then turned into this. Because I feel like that's something on the level of like Omen and Rosemary's Baby.
Right.
That's some next level stuff.
And the voodoo stuff was added in later. That wasn't actually part of the original screenplay. That got thrown in a little later. I don't even think that was what Don Mancini was even trying to do when he wrote this. that stuff as far as the voodoo and being able to transfer the soul and Charles Lee Ray was added in a little later. And then there was another idea where they wanted to toy with the audience whether Andy was or wasn't the killer. And then Kevin Tenney used it in, this 1996 film called Pinocchio's Revenge.
Oh, no. I remember this.
It's bad because you think this doll is going to be the one killing, and it's this little girl who is the killer the whole time when she's like, but the doll's doing it. And you're like, good, I'm glad Child's Play didn't turn out to be that, because it just wasn't well done at all. It just felt like a straight-to-video film that somebody made for less than $1 million.
Yeah, for not that much at all.
Right.
But the original premise, it seems, because we have like 3 writers here at the table.
Yes.
And this is kind of a weird thing because I got a feeling that there may have been too many cooks in this kitchen for what the original Child's Play could have been. I'm interested to see, because do you think Chucky would have gone down the same path of, at least of franchises that he has now, if this premise was intact, if the Blood Brother premise was intact?
I think people would know more about Andy Barclay,
right,
than they do about Chucky, and Chucky wouldn't be called Chucky; it'd be known as Buddy,
right?
Which makes sense because it was directly taken from the My Buddy dolls.
Exactly, and by then it's a completely different movie.
Completely different. It could work. I mean, it could just be, this doll dies, and then Andy keeps bringing other inanimate objects to life through these weird pacts.
The Andy Murder Machine franchise.
The Andy Murder Machine franchise. Or he might not even know that he's doing it, because it doesn't seem like from the original draft he knew what he was doing. It just was happening. So is Andy really a bad kid, or is it just...
Exactly. And then that turns into Ernest Saves Christmas.
That turns directly into Ernest Saves Christmas.
Yeah.
Or Ernest Scared Stupid.
Exactly.
That was just a few years after. So.
Or The Importance of Being Earnest.
Right. And I guess the original cut of the film was around 2.5 hours.
Wow.
So they really stretched it out. So Tom Holland, he filmed all these scenes from the copy of the script that had fleshed out the story a bit more time with Andy at the institution. The little girl who Andy's mom talks to briefly and says, oh yeah, Chucky was here just not that long ago. There's scenes with her talking to Andy, introducing, they become friends. And so that character is actually a character for more than just the 2 seconds she was on the screen. Stuff was just drawn out. There were extended scenes, more character development. But during the editing process, Tom Holland cut it, and that was it.
Like, there was no second cut, third cut? Like, they didn't really go... He had one round in the editing room, and that was it.
It wasn't one round, but as he was going through the film, he was editing it down. And, in the 80s, cutting room floor, it might be lost and gone forever. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time that happens.
We'll most likely never ever see that.
Trying to restore those scenes, that footage gets chopped out of there. It could just get thrown away.
Yeah,
and you never
which
see
was
it
so
again.
odd back in the day. Even back then, like as soon as the '80s, that was still practiced.
But
like,
where are you going to store it? What are you going to do with it?
Exactly.
The film will degrade over time. Sometimes you keep it. It's different directors' ideas, different producers, different studios on what they want to do with it.
Exactly.
So there's stuff that was filmed that Tom Holland says is out there, but we'll never see it.
And that's a fascinating thing that they had back in the day, because nowadays they never throw anything away.
No.
Like, because either a DVD extra, or there's always something to do with it later.
It's
the some form of
yeah. It's the digital era. That's what we can do now. Even some of the stuff that was on the cutting room floor that somehow people were able to get.
Yeah, right. Like we freaked out when we found out that there was 30 seconds from Return of the Jedi where Luke builds a lightsaber for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, and people lost their minds because of that, because like we didn't find that until like 3 years ago, and that set the world on fire. Something like losing like a third of the movie Child's Play. Obviously, nobody's going to be clamoring for that, but that's still an interesting part of film history to find out.
Oh yeah.
And like I could only imagine the things that have been lost to time. And I'm glad that, I'm honest, I'm glad the Child's Play has not been lost to time. Even though we've got literally a slope downwards of quality from every single franchise sequel into the negative cesspool of Seed of Chucky.
Yeah. And Curse of Chucky, brought it back, and Don Mancini wants to do another one.
Of course.
Which is great. Curse of Chucky went straight to video, which now you can do, and it's not a bad sign for a film.
No. And with the way that distribution happens now, like you could easily go on demand or any other number of things.
Yeah, and that's what they did. They did on demand. They did the Blu-ray DVD, and now I think it's on Netflix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm one of the most notorious slashers in history.
So, Rob, I thank you for your recommendation. I think I would recommend it if not for maybe never ever seeing any of the sequels, because if it's true that what you say that like it's never really as good as what it is, because like if you're in for it for like the weird kills and just it getting zany and cartoonish more and more and more and more and more, then yeah, that's probably the franchise for you.
I'm gonna regret saying this. So growing up, I hated the third one. I hated it so much.
Third Chucky,
it's the one where so it takes place 8 years later.
Right, yes. Okay.
Andy is now in military school.
And that's called?
Child's Play 3.
Child's Play 3. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I didn't like it at the time. It took away... So the second one I liked because you're introduced to the factory and you're introduced to the toy company and everything that's going on in there, and you're still following Alex Vincent's character as he's trying to get over this horribly traumatic time in his life.
Right.
So the second one's kind of cool. You get a few cool kills in there. Chucky being Chucky, which is great, but the practical effects are amazing in it. The puppetry and everything that they're doing for the doll is awesome. And in the third one, they're still doing that, but I didn't really like the story very much. But looking back at it after Seed of Chucky and Bride of Chucky, I would totally watch it again and probably really enjoy it.
Merely just by the comparison of what came before.
Even looking back at it, I'm like, you know what? Child's Play 3, not nearly as bad as what I thought. It wasn't great at the time, but it actually gets better with age because of how terrible Ronnie Yu's Bride of Chucky was.
I find that it's more and more that, like, whenever you find a decent one, it's usually in contrast to all of the bad that you just saw.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a fine journey for us to take here. I would recommend Child's Play, and then I guess the rest is up to your discretion.
I would say, if you're going to see them, see the original trilogy, Child's Play 1, 2, and 3. I would say avoid Bride of Chucky, except for John Ritter, because John Ritter's great.
John Ritter's amazing. Seed of Chucky, I consider it pure garbage. I cannot stress that enough. I hate that movie. Okay, but pure garbage. I'm on board.
Curse of Chucky, same director, the guy who's written all of them, way better.
Borderline fine, you might say.
That's when stop parodying what you've made and try and take it seriously. The first one that's what was great about it. Even 2 and 3, when you think about it, they take themselves pretty seriously. Some terrible stuff happens in it. But once you're making a parody of your own franchise, you lose us.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't do that too long, at least.
No.
And yeah, I think we've cracked a good nut this week.
Oh yeah.
That's a good one to start off with. So, thank you guys very much for listening to Oh the Horror, and hopefully we will see you guys next time, and we'll be taking a look at a more modern film next time.
I'm Rob Holmes.
And I'm Steve Allman. Thanks again for listening, everybody.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
Come, it is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
When there's no more room in hell,